Hey, how you doing, fellas? Good to be back. So today, a long overdue video. We're going to be unboxing some anime figures, as you do on an anime figure channel. Though today's video is a little bit more special because I'm tackling a handful of figures that are likely going to be in my top 5 of the year. I think 3 of them will appear on that list when we get around to it in January. And that's maybe a bold statement to make, but you've seen the thumbnail. You know what's on offer right now, or at least a tease. So I don't think I'm making a bold statement here. I think it's just facts. I know what I like, but I also think this is some premium stuff in this video. Also very expensive. But before we get there, I do have an announcement to make. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I'm finally doing it. I've decided to open up a Patreon. Now, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the platform. A ton of people use it. Just a way to support your favorite creators, especially in these like niche hobbies and just like circles on YouTube and stuff like that. And the reason I'm deciding to do it is just realizing how much time I spend on some of my videos, like the pre-order roundups or one fest and one hobby, stuff like that. And while I do love making it, it's definitely getting a little bit harder to dedicate that much time. So this is like a way to help me just stay on top of things and focus on it and make sure I can make the best content that I can. There's a couple of tiers, of course. I feel like I made things pretty self-explanatory. I am offering like early access to some of my videos depending on the content. Like I don't want to lock behind like the news videos because I pretty much just get those out as soon as they're available, and that's going to remain the way it is. But I'm also going to be making some exclusive videos on Patreon. There is in fact one on Patreon right now if you do subscribe. And then, you know, there's some extra stuff mixed into all of those tiers as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't want to spend too much time on the Patreon in this video because I know some people don't want to hear about it. However, if you do decide to check it out and you do decide to support me, then it's very greatly appreciated and it means a lot. But with that being said, let's get started with the unboxing. Alright, so check this out. Here we have the Hatsune Miku and Cinnamoroll collaboration Nendoroid. This has got to be the cutest Nendo of the year. This is just way too precious, and also such a good idea. I don't think it started with the Nendoroid. Like, I think they've done this before in the past, but it just fits the Nendoroid form so well that I can't help but love it so much. Now, this is a very expensive Nendo. It was like 9,800 yen, at least the retail before any discounts. I will say, and I don't want to start off negative, but there is 2 things about this Nendo that I'm not the biggest fan of. Very nitpicky, pretty minor, but for some reason, you get 2 Cinnamorolls in this package, but there's only 1 stand. Now, I believe that's because there's only canonically 1 Cinnamoroll, right? I mean, hey, maybe I'm wrong, but you could technically have 2 of him on display if you had an extra stand. And 2 is the tied-up hair option that you can give Hatsune Miku. Now, nothing against the sculpts, nothing against like the way it's painted. This just looks adorable in terms of presentation, but the functionality and like how you put it on her head is really not that well thought out. This feels very half-baked. So you take off the twin tails, you attach these 2 pieces to her hair, but then like there's this little plastic tab that you're supposed to slot into the 2 pieces of her hair that like, you know, forms into one, but it doesn't really stay in place. I can't for the life of me get this piece like securely in place. So it just like wobbles all over the place and it just bugs the hell out of me. I just don't like the way they executed this. But everything else I think they knocked out of the park, especially the presentation. Like, she kind of reminds me of a plushie, but I just love the more simplified Miku design here. Like, her outfit didn't really deviate that far at all. In fact, it looks pretty similar to a lot of her other like designs and whatnot. But her face just being a little bit more rounded, the way the eyes are designed. I would say you can't really go wrong with like any of the faceplates, which is always a plus when it comes to Nendos. For instance, you have the smiling faceplate, which is the default, which is the most like basic, but it's also the one that shows off her eyes the best. But then there's also a winking faceplate as well as a relaxed look, which is probably my favorite just because it pairs up really nicely with the tied hair accessory, as well as these 2 arms that are like holding it in place. Though I should say, her normal twin tails are so massive here, and because of their like lack of just like strand detail, again, it really does make her look like a plushie. Her hair looks very soft. Honestly, the whole figure feels soft, just like that matte finish they gave it. Feels very high quality for a Nendo, a little bit better than like some other Nendos I've opened in the past. And speaking of hair options, we could also talk about Cinema Roll because there's 2 of them, and the way it works is that you get 2 bodies and 2 head sculpts. So you get the normal Cinema Roll look, and then a Miku-inspired Cinema Roll. The only real issue here is that on the naked Cinema Roll, I guess we'll call it that, there's like a little hole so that Miku can actually hold him, but you don't get that option with the Miku outfit, which I feel like they could have just added a hole to that body sculpt as well, but since they didn't, you can't actually do that. Also, before I forget, you do get a cinnamon roll accessory with this Nendoroid as well, which is just extremely fitting for obvious reasons. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think this is a fantastic little Nendo. Probably my favorite Miku Nendo that's been released so far, and there's like 200 plus at this point. That's not a real number, but I'm assuming just because that's like Good Small Company's favorite character to make figures for. But with that, I think we're ready to move on to our next figure. So I was actually thinking of talking about this one a little bit later in the video, but for reasons, we're gonna do it now. This is Chun-Li by Max Factory, a 1/6 scale, mind you, so pretty good size, though also pretty dang expensive. This was like a little bit past the 30,000 yen range. I think it was like 33,000. Which is definitely a lot of money, but considering they got Akimon to design this figure of Chun-Li, the original character illustrator for Street Fighter 2, yeah, I think I'm okay with that. Now, the assembly is as straightforward as it gets. You pretty much cannot fail this, you can't mess it up. The glossy base on the bottom just has this like big peg that you slot the building onto. There is a little water bottle that is included with this figure as well, but if I'm being honest, I actually don't like it that much. Not only could I just lose this piece, but I feel like it doesn't really mesh with the rest of the figure. It looks out of place to me. It looks a lot cheaper than like the presentation of Chun-Li and the base, so I just don't really want to use it, but it's an option for you guys if you do like it. And the reason that Chun-Li includes a water bottle is because of the idea of this sculpt and the composition. It's supposed to be a relaxing Chun-Li, away from the combat, away from the battles, right? It's just Chun-Li taking a breather, chilling for a little bit, and I think that's a lovely idea. Frankly, a lot of Chun-Li's figures aren't really that dynamic. She might be in a more like iconic pose depending on the sculpt, but I think this really does capture a beautiful side of her that we don't often see. And just to circle back, because Akimon designed this figure, I think her face looks absolutely beautiful. From the way the eye decals are designed, bright yellow eyes with these really thick black outlines, her eyebrows have a more realistic approach, which you really don't see on figures like this, and I love the way her eyebrows look, and then her lips are also glossy. It all just comes together to make a gorgeous face sculpt. And while we're here, we might as well talk about her hair, which has these blue highlights just throughout the sculpt. And I guess my interpretation of this is that she's sitting around some like neon lights or something. That, or they just wanted to go with the color blue because that's pretty much her color, you know what I mean? I think it goes without saying, but every inch of Chun-Li's outfit, from the dress to the boots and even like the spiked bracelets, are just so impressively shaded. And you can't forget about her leggings too, those look phenomenal as well. Really like the muscle definition throughout Chun-Li. Her physique is just so on point, her arms and especially her thighs and legs, like, my god, her legs look enormous, maybe even like too much, like they're too big, but I think it's just because she's sitting down and pressing her thighs against the building, which will just make them look a little bit wider, right? But yeah, I love the way they like painted the creases and muscles a little bit darker, like those shadows, just to highlight them even more, as if you wouldn't notice, but the end result is that her legs just look insanely good. But yeah, the base, this building or whatever it's supposed to be that she's sitting on, could just be a bunch of concrete cubes for all I know. It's like fully destroyed on the back. I think it looks pretty cool and definitely fits within like the Street Fighter universe and the vibes, right? And I guess one other detail that I really like about this figure is the sash around her waist is actually sculpted. It's not a decal. It's not like the dragon is painted on. That's actually sculpted, which makes it look so much better. That like hint of depth I feel like goes a long way. But yeah, I can't really make the claim that this is the best Chun-Li figure. It's certainly my favorite, but truthfully, this is the only one that I own, and there's so many Chun-Li figures. Chun-Li is not shy when it comes to merchandise. She's one of the most popular and like most iconic video game characters ever. so it just makes sense that there's so many Chun-Li figures out there. But because they got Akimon on board, as well as Max Factory, one of the best in the biz, I feel pretty confident in saying this has to be like a top 5 Chun-Li figure. I mean, I can't really think of any flaws with this one. The quality control was perfect. It is a spotless figure. I love all the gold trim adorning her outfit, right? And like the flow of her buns and the ribbons. It looks so good. I love everything about this sculpt, everything about the paint apps. It's just very impressive. I don't know what else to say. I have no idea if this is like a rare figure, if it's sold out everywhere, if you can't get it anymore. But if you like Chun-Li, you gotta get this if you could afford it. It's very expensive, but at the same time, it's like a must get if you can. Yeah, so this is Figma Emmy from Metroid Dread. This has gotta be the biggest Figma out there. If not the biggest, then like second biggest, cause my god. But yeah, sorry for like this outrageous pose I have Emmy in right now. I've just been messing around with this one, trying to figure out like how all the joints work, and I don't fully have a grasp on it yet. But really, I just want to show it off and just like talk about my first impressions with Emmy, because I think it's sick. I really like that I picked this up, but I still need to learn a little bit more about it, because there's some poses on the box that I just cannot do. I don't know if those are lies or if I just don't fully understand what I'm doing. There's like some crazy torso movement on this Emmy that's shown off, and I just cannot do that for the life of me. Now, if you're not familiar with Emmy, this robot is a DNA extracting robot. It's pretty much being used to extract the Metroid DNA from Samus using the spike on its face, so you know it's gonna hurt. In fact, it is absolutely lethal. You get hit with this thing in the game, you just die. So yeah, they're hell-bent on just hunting Samus down, and by like any means necessary. These things are equipped and they're dangerous, and the movement in the game, they're very like fluid. They can do like 360 movements on like any of their joints, and a lot of that is represented here, like just how lanky Emmy is and like how far you can extend the arms and legs. Each claw has its own ball joint. You could pose them however you would like to. There's like so much movement in that torso. It's all segmented. Same goes for the neck. And it does have a couple of accessories, but I would say it's really just like different head pieces. Not so much that you could like equip Emmy with, but you have like a different mask and then like the extraction spike that I mentioned earlier. But that's kind of it. This is a very light accessory Figma. At the same time, the paint is also like non-existent. Most of the plastic is just unpainted, like on the whites and the dark gray portions. In fact, my biggest issue with this Figma is that it's covered in like nub marks. Maybe like stress marks makes more sense. If you were like cutting out a gunpla from a runner and you like used a clipper, it would like stress the plastic and turn it white. That's all over Emmy, especially on those claws like I mentioned earlier. And frankly, it just looks bad. That does not look great at all. I don't mind that the plastic isn't painted because the colors are very accurate, and they do paint areas like the face. The red eye is like a very glossy plastic, and even like the mesh around the neck I think looks very good. I guess it's just a little strange to be talking about a figure that really doesn't have paint on it outside of any silver area like those pipes around the torso, which are very flexible just to help it move along as you're posing the figure so you don't break anything. And there's actually some metal screws in this figure just so that like it could actually hold these poses so that things don't break to help the stability. And the posability really is the star of the show here. Even if I don't fully understand it, I can get like some pretty sick poses here, like the stalker mode and like the mode where it's walking really creepily towards you, and you can make Emmy look like it's going berserk. Just stuff like that really does sell the figure. It's very expressive despite being a killing machine, and I think that says a lot about the construction and engineering of the articulation. This just feels like another one of those Figma that we don't get super often. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say about Emmy. It would be very fun if they made like recolors of Emmy as like exclusives or something like that, because there's a bunch of different colors in the game. I doubt that would happen, but considering the white areas are just plastic, it's probably not that hard to paint Emmy yourself if you want to. Also, I should point out, they gave Emmy a very special X base. I don't think I've ever seen that on a Figma before, and I think it looks pretty cool. But anyway, let's move on to our next figure. Yeah, it's time to talk about a big one. This is Romelia Scarlet from Alter in the Toho Project series, a very expensive figure at around 36,000 yen for a 1/8 scale. It's kind of unheard of, but at the same time, no, it's not, because her sister was the exact same price a year ago. Now, unlike her sister, this figure of Romelia jumped up in price immediately. As soon as she came out, she was sold out, and then doubled in price to like 60,000 yen or more, which is like, crap, you know, that sucks. But also, I feel like everybody who was following this figure knew that that was gonna happen. It was just like the most obvious thing, unfortunately. Now, I do want to point out something that I find weird, and I'm wondering if it's only on my copy, because this just doesn't make any sense to me. But on her dress, the frills in the front, only one area of it is very squishy, and I don't get why. I don't know why it's like this, but I mean, it looks fine. It doesn't really bother me if I'm just looking at the figure, but I know it's there. I know it's really soft for some reason, and I'm wondering if anybody else has this issue, because I just don't get why it would be this way. So yeah, there's a lot of comparisons we can make here between this figure of Romelia and the Flandre figure from last year, because they're set up in a very similar way, designed by the same artist. Their bases are nearly identical, with just a few minor differences, like the colors of the leaves and the roses are not actually the same. I would say the colors across the board on the Romelia figure are a little bit cooler, where they were much warmer on the Flandre. And they also both have this stained glass behind them, but on Romelia's figure, it's pretty much pristine, where on Flandre's it was cracked. But it's not the same sculpt. Like, it's not a copy, they were just inspired by the same idea. And you could tell just by looking at, like, the thorns, they don't really circle the base in the exact same way. Or just looking at the flowers, they're not sculpted the exact same way either. But another similarity is that Romelia also comes with two poses. One where both of her hands are, like, kind of to her chest, feels a little dainty in the way she's set up. And then she also has her spear, which is enormous, and it's painted in this really nice metallic red. I don't think you could go wrong with either, but the spear, which I believe is called the Gungnir, if I pronounced that correctly, probably didn't, just has a lot more impact when you look at the sculpt. But the wings as well, like, my god, do the wings look amazing. That glossy red color is just so rich and vibrant, and then on the back of the wings is more of a maroon, which I feel like fits a little bit more with the rest of her palette, but the front just gives you that crazy contrast you probably want, with the rest of the palette being a little bit cooler. So these wings just look insanely good from a visual standpoint, but they also add like a really nice amount of width thanks to the wingspan, so the figure feels a little bit more substantial. They're so spread, there's just like this huge sea of red behind Romelia, which is also complemented with the purple of the glass window behind her. It's a really, really lovely palette, and we haven't even talked about most of the colors yet, like her icy blue hair, how it gets a little bit darker at the tips. The gradation of her hair is outstanding, and frankly, the meticulous sculpting of just the hair sculpt in general really is impressive. Love her face as well, those striking red eyes you would expect Romelia to have, but the way they sculpted her mouth too, those little fangs sticking out, pretty simplistic all things considered, but you could tell there's like an air of smugness, as if she's like mocking you with this expression. Her dress is pretty complex too, like the main color I would say is a light purple or like a darker pink, mixed in with some white, but then there's another layer of black and red and gold. Like, there's just a ton of colors here, the patterns along the dress, the frills, and just like how it gradates back into that purplish pink. It's insanely nice, you know? The billowing of her dress is definitely another highlight for me. It's just so airy in its movement and flow, and between the dress and the hat, it's just so like frilly and puffy, this design. I mean, I just couldn't make the claim with Chun-Li's figure, but this Romelia has gotta be her best figure to date. The paint apps are absolutely beautiful here. The shading, the gradation, every inch of this figure is flawless in terms of paint. The sculpting, these intricate, tiny details all across this figure, from the checkerboard base to the outfit to the little gems on her boots, it's all just so finely crafted. And even though it's a 1/8 scale, which is pretty small for anime figures these days, it just doesn't feel like it. It feels so much more substantial than that because of the really involved base and the really wide wingspan. It just all comes together to make a masterclass figure. I really think this is perfect, without a doubt. And it sucks, I can't recommend it because it's like 60,000 yen these days, but one day I'm sure they'll re-release it. They would be crazy not to. But for now, I guess happy hunting, if you could find one. And hey, if you do have one, well, I don't really have a point to make, but good job spending your money on something so nice looking. You did good. Yeah, so this is Artorias the Abyss Walker from Dark Souls, made by Gecko. This is a 1/6 scale, and it was the most money I've ever spent on a figure. I guess we'll call it a statue, but forgive me if I keep saying figure, because it's like brain rot at this point. I've said that word so many times. He retailed for like 98,000 yen. Not what I paid, it was closer to say like 80,000. Now, the reason he's so expensive is because of the way they've like constructed him. There's like so many individual pieces to this guy. Not that you have to do it yourself, but they like painted so many individual parts and then put it all together in the end just to make it as like accurate and as flawless as possible. Which, I mean, hey, as a fan of this character and of the series, I love that, but I don't know if I love it that much that it needed to be 98,000 yen. It's not even a 1/4 scale, which is probably like the biggest criticism most people have against this statue. It's just not big enough. And I think that's fair, but at the same time, I also don't really value the heights of a figure the same way a lot of people tend to do. Now, I think something this expensive probably should be a 1/4 scale, but in most instances, I feel like the details and the paint matter so much more. I just wish they found a way to make it a little bit cheaper. God damn, that's way too much money. But, you know, Dark Souls fans are kind of used to it, kind of used to having to spend so much money for our collectibles. When we miss out, they're this much money, and I guess now when they're new, they're this much money. So I guess we're screwed in the end either way. But man, let's just talk about Artorias already. The assembly for this guy is extremely straightforward. All you really have to do is put the plume on the helmet, and then his wrist is detached, which is holding the greatsword, so you just slot that in as well. He's already attached to the base, so you don't gotta worry about that. So when it comes to an Artorias figure, there's been a couple so far. There's one key feature, one element of Artorias' character that needs to be nailed, and they all attempt it, but I feel like this is the first one that actually gets it right, and it's his stance, his posture. This guy is lost, and when I say lost, I mean like he is no longer himself. He has gone to the abyss, right? And because of that, he has pretty much gone crazy and feral, and you can see that with the way he is just standing here, menacingly, very unnerving, right? Like you look at him, you know something's wrong. He's lost like all movement in one of his arms, and just like the way he's carrying this great sword over his shoulder, which is supposed to be a two-hander, but because his left arm has gone limp, he pretty much is forced to use his sword the only way he can. But this slouched posture, this beast-like appearance is just so integral to Artorias. I mean, it's not like he has a face, right? You can't rely on the facial details here to convey feelings or emotions or expressions, so you have to rely on the body language. You have to rely on the pose to get that characterization down. It's a little intimidating and also a little depressing if you know the story, but also it's fully realized. Now, the base is the Ulasil Coliseum, where you fight him. It's a fairly simple base, right? Mostly composed of green stones that make up the Coliseum, but there is also the abyss sludge that is dripping off of him, which is a very nice shade of blue, very goopy and shiny looking. If you look at the cloth on the armor, you can see that it's actually stained with this abyssal sludge, and his legs are also just like covered in this sludge as well. Just like the rest of the From Software figures that Gecko has made so far, one of the biggest highlights, one of the treats that you get, that you are given when you buy a From Software Gecko figure, is the weathering techniques that they use. It's just so dirty and damaged and rusty. Like, you look at the chainmail, it's rusting away, but this time there's also like dirt and mud caked in. The cloth, the fabric of his armor is just tattered and just shredded to pieces, and the armor plating is just scratched up to oblivion. And I gotta give a shout out to the slash on his spine, which has just gone through the armor completely. This is some heavy, gnarly damage. It's ripped the cloak, it's gone through the plating, you can see the chainmail underneath. This looks awesome. I could say something similar about his greatsword. It's very ornate in design, but it's been corrupted just like its owner. It's just covered in that sludge on like one of the sides, and it's gross, and I love it. I love how gross this figure looks. Even the belt around his waist has been stained with that sludge, and it's starting to like eat away at the leather. Like, that's so good. This figure is just like actually immaculate. I've been saying that like this whole video, but I have opened a lot of really nice figures, and I kind of feel like I've said everything I really wanted to about Artorias. Like, the weathering is top notch, the shading is sublime, and considering how meticulous they wanted to be with this guy, I think the sculpt speaks for itself. This is a marvel of a statue. I think it's stunning. I think this makes for my 4th Dark Souls Gecko figure. though I don't know if I've shown them all on the channel yet. We'll do that eventually. In fact, I would love to do a size comparison for you guys, but they're like all in boxes right now, and I'm moving in like a month or two, so it's not really worth it for me. I don't think it's a big deal, but I did take a picture of Artorias and Chun. They're both 1/6 scales, and you could tell that Artorias is quite larger, so hopefully that helps you understand how tall this guy is. I mean, he's slouched down too. If he was standing up, he'd be up to here. But either way, thank you very much for watching. This was a doozy of a video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and once again, consider checking out my Patreon if you want to support the channel. But until next time, I'll see you guys very soon. Don't even know what the next video is, so just stay tuned and I'll make something soon. Bye.